Well, thank you all for being here. I think with that kind of an introduction, you can tell why Politics and Prose is such an incredible bookstore and is thriving when so many other independents are closing down, just because they actually read the books that they are selling, and they have all sorts of interesting matrix-like analogies that they can make about them, which sort of keeps it very current. And exciting. So, but thank you everyone for coming. I'm very heartened to see some people who I don't actually know in the crowd, although I do know a lot of you. And thank you for I've got my ringers all over the room. But I do appreciate your interest. So, just a little bit about me. You heard that I was at the Wall Street Journal for 10 years, and I actually see someone who's married to one of my old bosses out here, so I feel like this is all going to be, I have a tough audience. But so I was at the Wall Street Journal for 10 years, and my last assignment there was to cover the bid by Rupert Murdoch to buy the paper. And as much as we all had heard that Rupert Murdoch was interested in the journal and that it was something that he had sort of coveted over the years, it was still, when it happened, sort of a shock. And I remember calling the Bancroft family members. There's also a Bancroft member in the room today, so I feel like this is really going to be a tough crowd. But we we were in a state of a little bit of disbelief, like how was this really going to happen? We knew that the paper had been independent for 105 years, and it was hard to imagine that changing. But of course, then over the course of several months, it became obvious that that was in fact going to be the outcome, and it was. And he made this, Rupert Murdoch made a stunning offer. It was $5 billion, which was at the time a 76% premium over what the journal was worth at the time. And the negotiations were fascinating and interesting to see how he managed to know so much about what the Bancrofts were doing and thinking, and I think manipulated that to his advantage. And then he got the paper, and he managed to disregard the editorial independence agreement that he had put in place in order to convince the Bancroft family that that he should sell the paper. So one of the main things that they had negotiated with him over was an editorial independence agreement that was going to protect the three top editors at the paper. And it took about 4 months for Murdoch to decide that he didn't want the editor that had been chosen by the old journal regime, and he decided to, in effect, fire him and push him out. And that was all sort of is encapsulated in the book. But the part of the what I want to read to you tonight is a section of the book about how that period was being sort of managed after he had agreed to the deal, and when the old regime was still in place, the old editor was still running the newsroom and running the paper. And the old editor of the paper is Marcus Broccoli, and he is now the editor of your local paper, the Washington Post. And he was at the Journal for 24 years, and I think he's not here tonight. He actually thought he was going to maybe come, but so the section I'm going to read to you is essentially, there are three characters. There's Rupert Murdoch, and there is Marcus Broccoli, who got his job as managing editor of the Wall Street Journal the day that Murdoch made his offer. And then Robert Thompson, who is the editor that Murdoch had worked with before, and really, I think saying he loved him is probably an overstatement, but they had a very close relationship, and he was made the publisher of the paper right after the deal went through, and so he was sort of Broccoli's boss. So just to tell you that those are the three characters in this scene, and it's an interesting one because it shows the dynamic of what Marcus Broccoli was sort of facing during that time, that he was trying to sort of protect the old way that the journal had existed and still try to sort of bridge this unbridgeable gap with his new boss and owner. Broccoli valiantly continued onward, putting the paper out every day and second-guessing himself more often than that. He busied himself with keeping Murdoch and Thompson out of the newsroom. He was in a race to change the paper in a way that satisfied them, yet Broccoli insisted that neither man meddled in coverage. I had more contact with the previous publisher than the current one, he told colleagues. But avoidance took more energy than engagement, and in his furious rush to keep them out of his affairs, Broccoli appeared constantly preoccupied. On February 13th, a snowy day not long after Broccoli had gathered the bureau chiefs together, Thompson stood in Broccoli's ninth floor office with a request from the boss. "Rupert thinks I should have an office on 9, he said, almost sheepishly. Until then, Thompson had resided on the executive 11th floor and had to descend 2 floors on the elevator to see the news desk. Broccoli swiveled in his chair to face out his wall of windows overlooking the newsroom, where beyond his assistant's desk there lay a swath of empty carpets and no desk or reporters or editors. Broccoli's grand redesign of the newsroom hadn't yet begun, and there was still a large chunk of the newsroom that wasn't being used. "Gee, there's no space down here," he said to Thompson, with a barely perceptible smile. "Look, it's not what you think," Thompson said. "He doesn't want to make me editor." With his stooped carriage and ever-present black suits, Thompson cut an unusual figure in the newsroom, but he could be unexpectedly charming. He was ultimately responsible in Murdoch's eyes for the paper, though Broccoli didn't yet see it that way. Thompson didn't want to have to continue to answer to Murdoch that he had no desk on the newsroom floor. "To be honest, he wants us to be seen more in the newsroom," Thompson said. "He thinks we should be more visible." "Does he want me to quit?" asked Broccoli. "No, no," said Thompson, attempting to smooth things over and yet deliver a message. "He just wants things to move faster. You and he are moving in the same direction. It's just a matter of speed. I have to look after the culture and the staff, too. I can't do it all at once," Broccoli said, pausing. "You have to protect me." "I take a lot of bullets for you, to be honest," Thompson shot back. Broccoli's face flushed. He recovered quickly, accustomed as he was at this stage to the battering of his position. He suggested Thompson take over a vacant conference room near where the reporters for the financial magazine Barron's sat. The room was the second-to-last office on the way out of the Journal's ninth-floor newsroom between the Journal's graphics department and the Barron's office space. "If you take that," Broccoli said, always strategizing, "I can make the case you're in between the 2 publications and not in the Journal newsroom." Thompson agreed to the arrangement, but warned Broccoli, "Never tell Rupert I'm not in the newsroom." Of course, Murdoch needn't be told something he could witness with his own eyes, and the symbolism of it enraged him. Murdoch wanted his man on the newsroom floor, someone he could call to hear the latest news of the day. He didn't pay more than $5 billion to see his closest intimate stashed away in a closet nowhere near the reporters. That move, simple and petty, helped usher in what came next. And of course, what came next in about 4 months after this discussion was Broccoli's resignation, his forced resignation at the hands of Murdoch and Thompson. And that was, again, one of those things that that people were quite anticipated that it was going to happen, but were still surprised that it did. And the story of that day actually is one of the most exciting for me in terms of the reporting of this book. So I had started this, I had started reporting on this when I was a media reporter for the Wall Street Journal. I reported on it for the paper. And then when I took a leave, I did so without knowing if Rupert Murdoch was going to cooperate with the book or not. I just took the leave and pitched the book and then went to people afterwards to see if they would talk to me. And there was another book that was being written about Murdoch, and that author had tied up all this access to him. And so I kept sort of plaintively asking Murdoch's people, "Can I have any time with him? Can you give me some, a day with him, or I'd like to take a trip with him," because I'd always learned at the Journal that was the best way to actually spend time with someone, was not to sit in their office and interview them, but it was to travel with them, because you just end up getting a much better sense of them. So they finally offered me a day with Murdoch, and they said, "We're going to go to Washington, D.C. And my first reaction was, well, that's an awfully short trip. It's not going to be a very long plane ride. But it turns out that it was one of the most eventful days that I could have witnessed, because it was the day, in fact, that Broccoli's forced resignation was made official. And it was the day that Rupert Murdoch was being honored at a dinner at the Atlantic Council. And it was a black tie dinner, and I flew down with him on his plane with sort of 3 other people. And that was fun, because I don't normally travel that way.